Hello and welcome to the Pilgrim Way. My name is Norman Graham and I'm a minister in the Baptist Union of Churches in Scotland. The aim of these signposts is to try and help to connect the text of the Bible with our everyday lives. And today we're going to be looking at a passage of scripture from the book of 2 Kings and chapter 6. I'm going to read from verse 8 through to 23. Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, "I will set up my camp in such and such a place." The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, "Beware of passing that place, because the Arameans are going down there." So the king of Israel checked on the place indicated by the man of God. Time and again Elisha warned the king, so that he was on his guard in such places. This enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, "Tell me, which of us is on the side of the king of Israel?" "None of us, my lord the king," said one of his officers. "But Elisha the prophet who is in Israel tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom." "Go find out where he is," the king ordered, "so I can send men and capture him." The report came back, "He is in Dothan." Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. "Oh no, my lord, what shall we do?" the servant asked. "Don't be afraid," the prophet answered. "Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And Elisha prayed, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes and looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. As the enemy came down toward him, Elisha prayed to the Lord, "Strike this army with blindness." So he struck them with blindness, as Elisha had asked. Elisha told them, "This is not the road, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you're looking for." And he led them to Samaria. After they entered the city, Elisha said, "Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see." Then the Lord opened their eyes, and they looked, and they were inside Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elisha, "Shall I kill them, my father? Shall I kill them?" "Do not kill them," he answered. "Would you kill those you've captured with your own sword or bow? Set food and water before them so that they may eat and drink and then go back to their master." So he prepared a great feast for them, and after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away, and they returned to their master. So the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. Well, the books of 1 and 2 Kings have some of the best known stories from the First Testament, and this is surely one of them. These stories all occur at a time of national and international crises, a time when the people of Israel were engaging in idolatry and in which God was repeatedly demonstrating that he alone was God and called the people and the kings back to covenant faithfulness. And the events of our text today certainly capture the imagination and amongst the most dramatic of all the stories in 1 and 2 Kings. But this event also has a lot to teach us about God's character. And actually, I think this story is actually a story very much for our time. For we live in the midst of the most dangerous and frightening times in modern history. It is very possible that the conflict between Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah could easily expand into a region-wide conflict across the Middle East. The war in Ukraine is still very much locked in a stalemate, but one that will likely be deeply affected one way or another by the results of the presidential elections in the USA in November. And of course, the UK itself is bracing for austerity 2.0, although it will be called something else. Meanwhile, migration to escape conflict continues unabated. Underlying all of this is the constant threat of terrorism within Western democracies, especially with heightened tensions in the Middle East. And of course, some of these Western democracies are beginning to shift to the far right, and that brings with it a whole set of other problems. And that's just the international stuff. We are living in dangerous times. And so we need to hear a story like this one. For this story tells us that no one is so safe as the people of the Lord, even when they live in the midst of frightening times. So we can say that in some way this story is an invitation from God for us to trust him. Verses 8 to 13, we learn that Aram and Israel had been at war with one another on and off actually for years. But for all his superior power and might, the king of Aram was having no success against his old enemy. It must have been really unnerving for him that every time he put together his plans for attacking Israel, the king of Israel seemed to know exactly what he was planning and when. So the king of Aram naturally assumes that there is a spy in the camp, as it were, that some traitor was alerting the Israelites to their plans. And one day his frustration reached a point of boiling over when he angrily called his top officers and demanded to know who among them was in the pay of the king of Israel. As if anyone was ever going to admit that. I mean, your head would be chopped off in the next 5 minutes. But it's only then that they tell the king what it kind of seems like they might have known all along. It's not us, Lord, one of the officers replied. Elisha, the prophet of Israel, tells the king of Israel even the words you speak in the privacy of your bedroom. So naturally the king does what kings do. He puts a hit out on Elisha, which when you think about it is actually quite a strange thing for him to do in the circumstances. I mean, for months, God has frustrated every plan of the king of Aram by revealing them to Elisha. And there was no reason to think or anything to suggest that this plan would be any different. But he makes the plan anyway. I guess the problem for the king of Aram was that this was a whole new experience for him, because he was a pagan who worshipped a variety of gods. He worshipped gods who actually controlled nothing, because they were constantly at war with one another, apparently, in a bid for their own survival. That's their whole mythology. And their own gods, by their own myths, were as much subject to chance as the people who worshipped them. It's unlikely the king had ever had to deal with a god from whom nothing is hidden. However, his plan goes ahead, and Elisha's location was reported back to the king, who then sent some crack troops to try and kidnap him. Elisha's servant must have had quite a shock when he got up the next morning to discover that a whole army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. And terrified, he rushed back to Elisha crying, "What are we going to do?" He knows who the army is and why they've come. And if they capture his master, then he will likely be taken captive as well and suffer the same fate. In stark contrast to the servant, Elisha appears quite untroubled and he exudes an air of calm confidence. And it's interesting, I think, that Elisha seems to be more concerned for his servant in his fear than he is about the fact that there's a huge army surrounding them. And we're left wondering if his prophetic gift has failed him. Did he not know they were coming? He could have made his escape. Or if he was already aware of the army before his servant came running back to him with the news. I don't know if you've ever seen a shadow play. It's the ancient Chinese form of storytelling. A thin paper screen or a sheet is stretched across a stage with all the actors behind it, and a light shines behind them, casting their shadows on the screen, and all the audience sees is the shadows acting out the play. And this scene in 2 Kings 6 is like a shadow play, because there's much more going on behind the scenes than is immediately apparent, and Elisha knows it. He tells his servant not to worry and says, "There are more on our side than on theirs." His servant would have recognised this as a call to faith, but would have nevertheless wondered what Elisha meant. So Elisha prayed for his servant's eyes to be opened so that he would be enabled to see what Elisha could see. His prayer was in effect a request that his servant might get a peek behind the scenes of this shadow play that's going on in front of them, to see the deeper reality of the spiritual conflict around them. What his servant couldn't see was the spiritual forces of the armies of the Lord encamped between Elisha and the Aramean army. We find a similar scene in John Bunyan's book, Pilgrim's Progress. A short distance away from the porter's lodge, Christian entered a very narrow passage and saw ahead 2 lions in the way. Terrifying for anyone, but Bunyan says the lions were chained, but he saw not the chains. There's a famous story of a captain of a ship who looked into the dark night and saw a light in the distance, and immediately told his signalman to send the message, "Alter your course 10 degrees south." And he promptly received the reply, "Alter your course 10 degrees north." The furious captain sent another message, "Alter your course 10 degrees south. I am a captain." Soon the reply was received, "Alter your course 10 degrees north. I am a seaman, 3rd class." The captain sends another message, "Alter your course 10 degrees south. I am a battleship." And the reply came, "Alter your course 10 degrees north. I am a lighthouse." Just like the captain of the battleship, the Arameans had no idea what was ahead of them or the army that they were facing. And neither did Elisha's servant. And so Elisha prays that he'll have revelation from God to see it. And that's the thing. Most modern Westerners are brought up in scientific rationalism, and we struggle to conceive of another level of reality beyond our own that we can experience through touch and taste and smell and sight and hearing. But this event reminds us that there are indeed unseen forces at work in the world, and that the conflict we are engaged in as Christians is a spiritual conflict. And from time to time we may get a peek behind the scenes, but for the most part what we see is only a shadow of the reality that's playing on around us, the reality of what is happening. In many ways, actually, that's what the letter of Revelation is also trying to tell us, that just beyond the range of normal sight is another level of reality, and we need revelation from God to be able to see it. The protection of God through the secret knowledge of the plans of the king and the heavenly army sent to protect Elisha would have been a great comfort to the people for whom 2 Kings was written, because it was written to a people who were in exile in Babylon. It would have been a powerful reminder of the truth that we have already noted, that no one is so safe as the people of the Lord, even when they live in frightening times. And yet there is a danger in this truth, because it can lead us to an untruth, namely that we can and should always expect the kind of protection that Elisha and the Israelites experienced here. History is certainly littered with examples of God's miraculous intervention to protect and defend his people in the modern era as much as in ancient times. In the 1970s, at the height of Chinese persecution of Christians, 5 people stood up at the end of a service held in secret in someone's home to say that they had been sent to infiltrate the meeting and make arrests, but now they wanted to become Christians. Such stories enthrall us and strengthen our faith and confidence. But history is equally full of stories of Christians who've suffered greatly, and indeed who have died for their faith, and who are dying for their faith even today. Mark tells us in his gospel that Christ's people are hated by all. And more significantly, the experience of Jesus instructs us that the unseen protection of God is always present, but it's not always activated on our behalf, for he surely suffered and died at the hands of sinful men. In Matthew 26, when Jesus rebuked Peter for trying to defend Jesus with a sword, he said to him, "Don't you realize that I could ask my Father for thousands of angels to protect us, and he would send them instantly? But if I did, how would the scriptures be fulfilled that describe what must happen now?" It's as if Jesus is saying to Peter, "I don't lack the resources, but the time is not right. The Father's will must be done, and it's his will that I go through this." And we might find the same thing in our own experience. The armies of heaven are available, but the Father may call us to walk a different path. In whatever situation we find ourselves in, we are called to trust him because there is no safer place to be than in God's care. For although we may suffer and experience trials, there is no trial that can ever separate us from the love that he has for us in Jesus, or take away any of the promises that we shall inherit according to his word. The Aramean army is blind to the odds against them, and that blindness will now be compounded by blindness to their surroundings. When the army advanced to capture Elisha, he prayed they would be struck by blindness so they became dependent upon the very person that they'd come to capture. And Elisha led them right into the capital city of Israel, where they would be surrounded and easily overpowered by the Israelites. And you can imagine how they must have felt when God answered Elisha's prayer and restored their sight. The siege of Dothan is now reversed, and now they are at the mercy of their enemies. The best that they could probably hope for was a speedy death. And there's little doubt that that's exactly what it was on the king's mind when he called out to Elisha, should he kill them or not? The term that he uses, my father, is an acknowledgement by the king of Israel that Elisha's superiority and his superior authority to decide the outcome of the situation. Elisha's reply reminds the king that not only did they not kill prisoners of war, but these captives were also Elisha's captives and not the king's. Elisha treats them in the way that God's servants ought always to treat their enemies, as honoured guests. In Luke chapter 6, verse 27, Jesus commands his followers, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, pray for the happiness of those who curse you, pray for those who hurt you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn the other cheek. If someone demands your coat, offer your shirt also. Give what you have to anyone who asks you for it. And when things are taken away from you, don't try to get them back. Do for others as you would like them to do for you. Do you think you deserve credit merely for loving those who love you? Even the sinners do that. Do you think you deserve credit? And if you do good only to those who do good to you, is that so wonderful? Even sinners do that. And if you lend money only to those who repay you, what good is that? Even sinners will lend it to their own kind for a full return. Love your enemies, do good to them, lend to them, and don't be concerned that they might not repay. Then your reward from heaven will be very great, and you will truly be acting as children of the Most High, for he is kind to the unthankful and to those who are wicked. You must be compassionate, just as your Father is compassionate. The result of Elisha's act of grace to these enemies of Israel was that the Aramean raiders stopped attacking Israel. More than that, though, was the sense that these Syrian enemies had actually come under the care and protection of God. And I think there's a lesson there for us, that when we show grace and mercy to those who might otherwise expect judgment, the result might be greater than we could imagine. Those who were our enemies and God's might come under his protection and grace, and might meet us no longer as enemies, but as brothers, sisters, friends, fellow children of God. I pray we'll find the grace and the mercy and the resources we need to be able to do that, to be like our Father in heaven. Thanks for listening.